Men of Iron, Chapter 11. The two friends kept the secret of the Eyrie to themselves for a little while, now and then visiting the old tower to rummage among the lumber stored in the lower room, or to loiter away the afternoon in the windy solitudes of the upper heights. And in that little time, when the ancient keep was to them a small world unknown to any but themselves, a world far away above all the dull matters of everyday life, they talked of many things that might never have been known to one another. Mostly they spoke the crude romantic thoughts and desires of boyhood's time, chaff thrown to the wind, in which, however, lay a few stray seeds, fated to fall to good earth, and to ripen to fruition in manhood's day. In the intimate talks of that time, Miles imparted something of his honest solidity to Guskin's somewhat weathercock nature, and to Miles' ruder and more uncouth character Guskin lent a tone of his gentle manners, learned in his pagehood service as attendant upon the Countess and her ladies. In other things also, the character and experience of the one lad helped to supply what was lacking in the other. Miles was replete with old Latin guests, fables, and sermons, picked up during his school life in those intervals of his more serious studies, when Prior Edward had permitted him to browse in the greener pastures of the Gesta Romanum and the Disciplina Clericis of the Ministrum Library. Guskin was never weary of hearing him tell those marvelous stories, culled from the crabbed Latin of the old manuscript volumes. Upon his part, Guskin was full of the lore of the waiting-room and the antechamber, and Miles, who in all his life had never known a lady, young or old, except his mother, was never tired of lying silently listening to Guskin's catter of the gay doings of the castle gentle life, in which he had taken part so often in the merry days of his pagehood. "I do wonder," said Miles quaintly, "that ye could never find the courage to bespoke a young maid, Francis." "Never did I do so, nor ever could. Rather would I face 3 strong men than 1 young damsel." Whereupon Guskin burst out laughing. "Marry," quoth he, "they are not such terrible things, but gentle and pleasant spoken, and soft and smooth as any cat." "No matter for that," said Miles. "I would not face one such for the worlds." It was during the short time when, so to speak, the two owned the solitude of the Brutus Tower, that Miles told his friend of his father's outlawry, and the peril in which the family stood. "I do marvel," said Guskin one day, as the two lay stretched in the Eyrie, looking down in the castle courtyard below. "I do marvel, now that ye are established here this month and more, that my lord never has you called to service upon household duty. Can ye riddle me why it is so, Miles?" The subject was a very sore one with Miles. Until Sir James had told him of the matter in his office that day, he had never known that his father was attainted and outlawed. He had accepted the change from their earlier state and the bald poverty of their life at Crosby Dale with the easy carelessness of boyhood. Sir James's words were the first to awaken him to a realization of the misfortunes of the house of Falworth. He was a brooding nature, and in the 3 or 4 weeks that passed he had meditated so much over what had been told him, that by and by it almost seemed as if a shadow of shame rested upon his father's name, even though the attaint set upon him was unrighteous and unjust, as Miles knew it must be. He had felt angry and resentful at the Earl's neglect. As days passed and he was not noticed in any way, his heart was at times very bitter. So now Guskin's innocent question touched a sore spot. Miles spoke with a sharp, angry pain, in his voice that made other look up quickly. "Sooner would my lord have yonder swineherd serve him in the household than me." "Why may that be, Miles?" said Guskin. "Because," answered Miles with the same angry bitterness in his voice, "either the Earl is a coward that fears to befriend me, or else he is a caitiff, ashamed of his own flesh and blood, and of me, the son of his one-time comrade." Guskin raised himself on his elbow and opened his eyes wide in wonderment. "Afraid of you, Miles?" said he. "Why should he be afraid to befriend thee? Who are ye that the Earl should fear thee?" Miles hesitated for a moment or two. Wisdom bade him remain silent upon the dangerous topic, but his heart yearned for sympathy and companionship in his trouble. "I will tell you," said he, suddenly, and therewith poured out all of the story, so far as he knew it, to his listening, wondering friend. His heart felt lighter to be the ease of its burden. "And now," said he, as he concluded, "it is not this Earl a mean-hearted caitiff to leave me, the son of his one-time friend and kinsman, thus to stand or to fall alone among strangers, and in a strange place, without once stretching me a helping hand." He waited, and Guskin knew that he expected an answer. "I know not that he is a mean-hearted caitiff, Miles," said he at least, hesitatingly. The Earl has many enemies, and I have heard that he has stood more than once in peril, having been accused of dealings with the king's foes. He was cousin of the Earl of Kent, and I do remember hearing that he had a narrow escape at that time from ruin. There be more reasons than you know why he should not have dealings with your father." "I had not thought," said Myles bitterly after a little pause, "that ye would stand up for him and against me in this quarrel, Guskin. Him will I never forgive as long as I may live, and I had thought that ye would have stood by me." "So I do," said Guskin hastily, "and do love ye more than any one in the world, Myles. But I had thought that it would make you feel more ease to think that the Earl was not against you. Indeed, from all you have told me, I truly think that he and Sir James mean to befriend you, and hold you privately in high regard." "Then why does he not stand forth like a man, and befriend me and my father openly, even if it be at his own peril?" said Myles, reverting stubbornly to what he had first spoken. Guskin did not answer, but lay for a long while in silence. "Know ye," he suddenly asked for a while, "who is this great enemy of whom Sir James speaks, and who seeks to drive your father to ruin?" "Nay," said Myles, "I know not, for my fathers never spoke of these things, and Sir James would not tell me. But this I know," he said, suddenly grinding his teeth together, "if I do not hunt him out some day and slay him like a dog—" He stopped abruptly, and Guskin, looking at him, saw that his eyes were full of tears, whereupon he turned his look away again quickly, and fell to shooting pebbles out through the open window with his finger and thumb. "Ye will tell no one of these things that I have said?" asked Myles after a while. "Not I," said Guskin. "Think ye I could do such a thing?" "Nay," said Myles briefly. Perhaps this talk, more than anything else that had ever passed between them, knit the two friends the closer together. For, as I have said, Myles felt easier now that he had poured out his bitter thoughts in words. As for Guskin, I think that there is nothing so flattering to one's soul as to be made the confidant of a stronger nature. But the older tower served another purpose than that of a spot in which to pass away a few idle hours, or in which to indulge the confidences of friendship, for it was there that Myles gathered a backing of strength for resistance against the tyranny of the bachelors. And it is for that more than for any other reason that it had been told how they found the place, and for what they did there, feeling secure against interruption. Myles Falworth was not a kind that forgets or neglects a thing upon which the mind was once been set. Perhaps this chief objective, since they talked with Sir James following his fight in the dormitory, had been successful resistance to the extraction of the head of the body of Squires. He was now, more than a month had passed, looked upon by nearly, if not all, the younger lads as an acknowledged leader in his own class. So one day he broached a matter to Guskin that had for some time been digesting in his mind. It was the formation of a secret order, calling themselves the Knights of the Rose, their meeting place to be the chapel of the Brutus Tower, and their objective to be the righting of wrongs, as they, said Myles, of Arthur and his Round Table did right wrongs. "But pray what wrongs are there to right in this place?" said Guskin, after listening intently to the plan which Myles set forth. "Why, first of all, this," said Myles, clenching his fist, as he had a habit of doing when anything stirred him deeply, "that we set those vile bachelors to their right place, and that is that they be no longer our masters, but our fellows." Guskin shook his head. He hated clash and conflict above all things, and was for peace. Why should they thus rush to thrust themselves into trouble? Let matters abide as they were a little longer. Surely life was pleasant enough without turning it all topsy-turvy. Then, with a sort of indignation, why should Myles, who had only come among them a month, take such service more to heart than they who had endured it for years? And finally, with the hopelessness of so many of the rest of us, he advised Myles to let matters alone, and they would right themselves in time. But Myles' mind was determined. His active spirit could not brook resting passively under a wrong. He would endure no longer, and now or never they must make their stand. "But look ye, Myles Falworth," said Guskin, "all this is not to be done without fighting shrewdly. Will ye take that fighting upon your own self? As for me, I tell you I love it not." "Why, aye," said Myles, "I ask no man to do what I will not do himself." Guskin shrugged his shoulders. "So be it," said he. "If ye have appetite to run your head against hard knocks, do it in mercy's name." There is a spirit of drollery in Guskin's speech that rubbed against Myles's earnestness. "Out upon it," cried he, his patience giving way. "See ye not that I am in serious earnest? Why then do you still jest like Mad Noll, my lord's fool? If ye will not lend me your aid in this matter, say so and have done with it, and I will bethink me of somewhere else to turn." Then Guskin yielded once, as he always did when his friend lost his temper, and having once assented to it, entered into the scheme heart and soul. 3 other lads, one of them the tall, thin Squire Edmund Wilkes, before spoken of, were sounded upon the subject. They also entered into the plan of the secret organization with an enthusiasm which might perhaps not have been quite so glowing had they realized how very soon Myles intended embarking upon active practical operations. One day Myles and Guskin showed them the strange things that they had discovered in the old tower, the inner staircase, the winding passageways, the queer niches and cupboards, and the black shaft of a well that pierced down into the solid rock, of whence perhaps the old castle folk had oftentime drawn their supply of water in time of siege. And with every new wonder of the marvelous place, the enthusiasm of the 3 recruits rose higher and higher. They rummaged through the lumber pile in the great circular room, as Myles and Guskin had done, and at last, tired out, they ascended to the airy chapel, and there sat cooling themselves in the rustling freshness of the breeze that came blowing briskly in through arched windows. It was then and there that the 5 discussed and finally determined upon the detailed plans of their organization, canvassing the list of the squirehood, and selecting from it a sufficient number of bold and daring spirits to make a roll of 20 names in all. Guskin had, as I said, entered into the matter with spirit, and perhaps it was owing more to him than to any other that the project caught its delightful flavor of romance. "Perchance," said he, as the 5 lads lay in the rustling stillness, through which sounded the monotonous and caseless cooing of the pigeons, "perchance there may be dwarfs and giants and dragons and enchanters and evil knights and what not even nowadays. And who knows but that if we Knights of the Rose hold together, we go by forth into the world, and do battle with them, and save beautiful ladies, and have tales and gists written about us as they were written about the 7 champions and Arthur and his round table." Perhaps Myles, who lay silently listening to all what was said, was the only one who looked upon the scheme at all in the light of real utility, but I think that even with him the fun of the matter outweighed the serious part. So it was that the sacred order of the 20 Knights of the Rose came to be initiated. They appointed a code of secret passwords and countersigns, which were very difficult to remember, and which were used only when they might excite the curiosity of the other and uninitiated boys by their mysterious sound. They elected Myles as their grand high commander, and held secret meetings in the ancient tower, where many mysteries were soberly enacted. Of course, in a day or 2 all the body of squires knew nearly everything concerning the Knights of the Rose and of their secret meetings in the old tower. The lucky 20 were the objects of envy of not all so fortunate as to be included in this number, and there was a marked air of secrecy about everything they did that appealed to every romantic notion of the youngsters looking on. What was the stormy outcome of it all was now presently to be told.